I speak to you in the name of one true and living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. My old friends Boudreaux and Thibodeau were at it again. This time they went to a casino to play slots. A few hours, Tib had lost all of his money, so he went looking for Boudreaux, and he found him. Boudreaux was walking around carrying two of the biggest buckets you've ever seen full of quarters. Thibodeau said, "Man, I done lost all my money, and it looks like you done made a lot. Where'd you get all them quarters?" Boudreaux said, "Man, it was a miracle. I found this here machine in the corner, and it paid off every time I put my dollar bill in. I'd put my dollar bill in, and out would come 4 quarters. Every time." Think about it, it'll come. You know, we think we understand the concept, and we get a result, but it is not the result that Jesus is asking of us. The result that Jesus is asking of us is much different. He wants transformation, not just changing one value for the same value that looks different. 4 quarters look different than a $1 bill. Same value. Jesus wants us to receive something more. Transformation, a life free from sin. And to make his point, he uses a technique that is so common of his time among rabbinical teachers. Extreme exaggeration to make a point. Or as I like to say, a velvet-covered sledgehammer. Extreme exaggeration. And we get that technique. Growing up, my mother was fond of saying, "If you do that again, I'm going to pinch your head off." I still remember the wrestling coach looking at us and saying, "If you make that mistake again, I will make you run laps until you die." Neither one happened, by the way. Exaggeration, make a point. Trained in the sermon art of his day, Jesus is giving them an example. Cut it off at the root. If your arm causes you to sin, cut it off. Probably meaning if you're tempted to steal, cut off where that desire comes from. With your eyes, pluck them out if they cause you to sin. In those days, it would have been very common for the poor to look at the wealthy and begin to covet in their heart that which the wealthy had. Jesus is saying, cut out the root cause. And they knew that Jesus was not serious. He didn't want people running around, self-mutilating themselves, looking like a cartoon pirate. Not Jesus. He's exaggerating to make a point. What he's saying is, sin can overtake us. And when we try to control it, controlling sin is not easy. We can lose control. King Duncan told a wonderful story. In 1939, he tells the story of a Coast Guard vessel in the Canadian Arctic that sees a polar bear on an ice floe. And so to have fun, they throw the polar bear salami, peanut butter, and chocolate. And they so enjoyed watching the polar bear eat. And then they ran out of food. They were about to go on their way when they realized the polar bear was not through. He made his way on the ship. So they took out the fire hose to drive him back. They turned it on full blast, and the polar bear was in heaven, holding up his arm so he could get his armpit sprayed. They realized they had a problem. We don't know how they got that polar bear back on the ice floe, but we know they did it. They know they did it. And that's like sin. Those seamen learned a horrifying lesson about polar bears, and it's a lesson we can learn about sin. We get tempted with sin. but it'll stay away. Yet it climbs aboard our life. William D. Farrell said this: "It says something about our times that we rarely use the word sinful except to describe a really good dessert." Jesus knows it. Our intent is to control the sin, but the sin ends up controlling us. And Jesus says, cut it off. If we don't, sin will climb aboard our life. And no matter how hard we try, it's almost impossible to drive it away. Jesus is saying if we cut it off, maybe we can transform our lives from sin to holiness. It's like our story of Boudreaux and Thibodeau. Nothing really changed for them. A dollar bill became 4 quarters, still worth $1. I wonder what Jesus would tell us today. Once there was a woman who used Facebook to contact an old high school flame. Soon they began corresponding, and she recognized sin was creeping into her marriage. She cut it off. Right then and there, she logged out. And she determined to work on her marriage. Once there was a man struggling with addiction who had a great idea. I will only keep alcohol in my house for guests. He awakens one morning to discover he had become that guest through his addiction. And so he cut it off, telling the polar bear, "You're not allowed in my house." And from that moment on, he regained control. There was a young couple deep in debt. When they cut off their credit card buying, life changed for them. That's what Jesus is saying. All of us struggle with something. What keeps us from God? What do we struggle with? Cut it off. Is it drastic? You bet it is. That's what Jesus is saying. Cut it off if it causes you to sin. Cut it off if it makes you unhealthy. Cut it off if it keeps you from God. And when you do, you will be transformed. A changed life, a new beginning, and peace. You see, Jesus was exaggerating to make it easier for us to understand. We can control sin, or sin can control us. That's the choice of free will. Do we simply place a dollar bill in and we get shiny coins out and say, "Look, we've been changed"? Do we throw salami, peanut butter, and chocolate at the polar bear and not expect the polar bear to come on board? Or do we simply cut it off, that which makes us sin, and we become salt to the earth, a people of peace, and a people that understands sin is what keeps us from God? Amen.